All right. I am Ben Burgis. This is Give Them an Argument. I am joined tonight once again by Matthew Vernon Whalan, journalist, commentator, man about town. And we are going to be watching tonight, friend of show, which is usually a phrase I use in a sarcastic, shitty way. But in this case, I actually mean it literally. Norman Finkelstein debate the war in Gaza on the Piers Morgan show with Rabbi Shmuley, who is somebody who I think the last time before this that guy kind of swam into my awareness was when I think this was him. I remember there was he was ice skating in the park in New York, and there's this video where somebody came up and was like, are you Rabbi Shmuley? And he was like, yeah. And the guy was like, oh, he said free Palestine or something like that. And then he skated away. And then Shmuley chased the guy. It's young guy. And it was it was why did you do that? And the guy was super, this is December. The guy was super nice and chill about it. He, and at a certain point you could tell the other guy just wanted the interaction to end. He was like, all right, okay. Yeah. Good day, happy Hanukkah, right? And he just keeps at it. Yeah. And it's just the weirdest thing that he posts is oh my God, look at how I'm being harassed. And it's I don't know about this.
Yeah, he doesn't help himself with those kinds of things. There's a few things I feel come up like that in this. Also probably a terrible guy to be at the, what did you say, the park or skating rink? Yeah, with God, this is the last guy you want to be stuck behind at baggage claim at the airport, but I guess one thing that's going is confidence, extremely confident seemingly.
Yeah, I mean he's definitely been whatever, going on TV and dispensing his thoughts since at least late 90s. I feel like that's about right. As far as when I can first remember hearing about him. So yeah, not surprised that he's extremely confident. I do expect this to be kind of a weird disaster, but I am fascinated to see exactly how. I know that you've already seen this. You're writing something about this for your Substack, right?
Yeah, part of a larger effort to get my Substack up and going again more consistently. But yeah, I've been working on something for this where I am going through a more detailed fact check of each thing Shmuley says. I imagine a lot of it will be covered on the show, so I don't know, how far I'll take it or whatever. But I think in some ways it's not the most interest or substantive debate.
Yeah.
Because a lot of it gets wrapped up in, which I think is the goal, in when it comes to fact checking certain claims, they're all about Finkelstein and his personal life and the type of person he is and what other people think of him and whether or not Finkelstein said certain things. And it's not really that much about Gaza at the end of the day, and I think
which seems right, because ultimately if you're defending this, and this is a very recent debate, this is we're in the we're today's March 7th, right? So that's let's see, November, December, January, February, March, right? So we're at 5 months on the dot, since October 7th. And if you think about what's happened since then, right? Like, this is, at least 85% of the population of Gaza has been displaced from their homes. That's, that like UN report saying that is a while ago at this point. I think it's, almost certainly more than that by now. There was a massacre of people at a, like an aid truck, right? Who are like desperately trying to get food. There's been mass starvation, including children, literally starving to death. This is, there's been like, ultra nationalist like fanatics like blocking, aid trucks, from getting into Gaza. The like the things have gotten so bad that the United States actually like at least made a show of airdropping a few parcels of food. I mean, basically enough that something like 2% of the population of Gaza could have had one meal, right? But like literally, as many people pointed out, like a scene from the Hunger Games, because like that was the only way for them to get it in. Just so they could say that they've done a little bit, and so it's like at that point, it's like, man, if for some reason I lost my mind and I wanted to defend that,
Yeah.
I would want to change the subject to literally anything else too.
Yeah, totally. Like, yeah, at what point does it become too much, for even somebody like this?
Yeah.
But yeah, that it is a kind of desperate attempt to change the subject. I mean, Shmuley starts from like a very crazy place, and then it just gets crazier and crazier. Um, and I think that like the moderating kind of falls apart. Um, and I've heard somewhere that Piers Morgan kind of like addressed this on Twitter the next day or something. You might know more about that than me.
Oh, I actually don't. I've got a
Rabbi Shmuley for like, going too far with the ad hominem attacks or something.
interested. Okay.
But yeah, there's also just a lot said. I feel like I've also like I've I've consumed like a lot of Finkelstein's work, and like reread a lot of his work and listened to like a lot of interviews and speeches. Interviewed him myself twice, and like um I just feel like I'll sometimes I'll put on a little Finkelstein when I'm trying to fall asleep. Like, so for somebody to like make these claims about things he said and like his work, um I probably like care too much about those things because they're not actually about the conflict, and that's kind of the point.
Right.
But I definitely feel like defensive on his behalf a little bit.
Well, it is a little bit funny. I was just looking because I don't, I actually realized I hadn't followed Piers Morgan on Twitter. So it's like
Or you.
yeah, I know, right? I'm really missing out on some
Yeah.
insights there, but like I have, but I just searched for like the at Piers Morgan Uncensored or whatever plus Shmuley to see if I could find that tweet you're talking about, and I didn't find that. Although I did find one from November that sounds pretty similar. Says tempers phrase. Rabbi Shmuley accuses Cenk Uygur of being a Jew hater who is trying to cancel him. Whenever someone starts using personal names, screaming like a lunatic, they're losing the debate. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
I think that yeah, I think if you're calling Cenk a Jew hater like that, that gives us some idea of what we're in for tonight. But
Yeah, just wait. If you haven't seen this yet.
no, I'm watching this fresh.
I mean, one thing that despite the lack of substance or like information at some points, like there's definitely like plenty to make fun of here. It'll it's too, it'll be funny at points for sure. It's off the rails. So yeah.
Israel says Hamas has just weeks to release all remaining hostages before it launches a deadly assault on the Gazan city of Rafah. Prime Minister Netanyahu has rejected the latest round of negotiations as delusional. With the Palestinian death toll now exceeding 29,000, pressure on Israel globally is mounting. Brazil's President Lula said it's not a war in Gaza, but a genocide. Is he right? Is it time for Israel to end this war? We've invited two of our most passionate contributors to debate this, the American Jewish political scientist Norman Finkelstein and the author Rabbi Shmuley.
October 7th.
Let me ask you this.
1,200 Jews were burned to death, slaughtered, and no democracy should allow that, except for one person, Norm Finkelstein.
He's suffering from Judeo-dementia.
It's not Shmuley who suffers dementia.
Rabbi Shmuley seems incapable of processing very basic facts.
Do you think that, in principle, Hamas should stay in power?
Answer the question.
Allow me to finish.
Your debating style is to drone on, coma-inducing. That's how you debate. You try to put your opponents into slumber, for God's sake.
How about letting me decide whether it's a simple question?
I don't think you have to be a professor to answer the question. Should Hamas stay in power? Welcome to both of you. Let me start, if I may, with you, Norman Finkelstein. Good to have you back on Uncensored.
Thank you for having me.
We seem to be reaching a point here where something has to give. Either Israel stops obliterating Gaza and killing so many innocent people in the process, or I'm not sure what the alternative is. How do you read where we are with this war?
There are many ways to read it. You can read it politically, you can read it militarily, you can read it strategically, or you can read it from a point of view of human rights and international law, so long as it bears on human rights. Now, when it comes to the very last consideration, I think it's very clear how we should read it. Namely, the International Court of Justice, the supreme judicial body in the world, has said that Israel is under two obligations. Obligation number one is to honor the laws of war in what it's doing in Gaza. And obligation number two, Israel has to provide humanitarian aid and assistance to the people of Gaza. Those are its two obligations under international law. The court also ruled that Israel is plausibly committing genocide, and there is no evidence whatsoever, zero evidence, that since the court ruling, Israel has changed its tactics or its strategy in Gaza. So as of now, as we speak, Israel is still, by the conclusion of 15 judges in the International Court of Justice, 15 of the 17 judges, Israel is committing genocide or plausibly committing genocide, and it's not honoring its obligations as they were spelled out by the International Court of Justice.
Okay. Rabbi Shmuley, you tweeted this morning when we booked you for this debate. You called Norman Finkelstein an anti-Semite. You said, "You have my word that, God willing, I will digitally decapitate, digitally disembowel, and digitally destroy him." Do you think that was the right kind of rhetoric before you try and debate such a serious matter?
First of all, thank you for having me back, Piers. It's nice to see you. And Norm, I hope you don't mind if I call you Norm. You can please call me Shmuley. Norman Finkelstein is on the show for only one reason. If the journalistic idiom that Jews are news is true, because Israel's this big, it gets this much attention, then how much more so Jewish anti-Semites get the brightest headlights. Norman Finkelstein is the foremost Jewish anti-Semite on planet Earth. He actually attacked his own parents, whose only crime was to be Jewish. Their entire family was annihilated in Warsaw. They're not victims. They hated Germans and wanted them dead. He didn't think to himself, maybe my parents wanted the Germans to suffer to stop the war, to break the will of the German people, to stop murdering, gassing 10,000 Jews per day. His hatred of the Jewish people has extended even to his own family. He calls Israel a satanic state that comes from the boils of hell. He calls it a vandal state. He said that the 15 people murdered in the Charlie Hebdo massacres, he has no sympathy for them whatsoever. But this is the most telling thing of all, and you discussed this the last time. He said on October 7th, hours after the massacre of 1,200 Jews started, he wrote, "It warms every fiber of my soul to see the children of Gaza smiling as their arrogant Jewish supremacists that have been humbled. The stars above in heaven are looking down. Glory, glory, hallelujah." Let's just go through this. 400 women shot in the genitals, their breasts cut off as terrorists played with their bloody breasts like a football. Glory, hallelujah. Women shot in their genitals, Norm. Glory. You should be a televangelist. Glory, hallelujah. Children burned to death and beheaded. Glory, hallelujah. Come on. You're a fair person, Piers. This is exactly what your friend Douglas Murray said, because he refuses to debate Norman Finkelstein. He called him a sociopath. He said Norman Finkelstein is a psychotic. He's not on your show because he's a serious academic. Wolfgang Benz, professor of Ellingen, who was one of the foremost German historians of the Holocaust, said the only thing interesting about Norman Finkelstein is that he needs a psychiatrist.
Okay, well, look.
Professor Wolfgang. Wait, one second. Professor Wolfgang.
I want to just ask you this, though. You see, it's interesting. Norman Finkelstein gave I thought, a pretty measured argument in response to my first question. You've gone ad hominem immediately and attacked the man, not the issue, and not the question that I asked you, which is to respond to what he was saying, which is a growing feeling around the world, by the way, that Israel is now committing, as he put it, as the court said, a plausible genocide. I don't happen to think it is genocide they're doing, but what I do think is happening is that there is a shameful number of innocent women and children being slaughtered on a daily basis, and I don't see what the end game is other than the obliteration of most of Gaza and many people living there. So to answer that point,
so let me answer your question directly. First of all, when you quote President Lula of Brazil, he is a criminal who served in jail for corruption. He has zero credibility. He also knows nothing about history. 10,000 Jews were gassed a day for 4 years after the Wannsee Conference in January 1942. To compare that to Gaza is an abomination. Secondly, Norman Finkelstein is a liar. The International Court of Justice specifically said that Israel is not committing a genocide. So when you tell me, why do I go after him ad hominem? I'm questioning his academic credentials. He just lied on international TV. South Africa sued to get the ICJ to declare that Israel's committing a genocide, and they said they're not committing a genocide, and they said they would not stop the Israeli offensive. That is a straight-out lie.
Okay, well, all right. If you're going to call, if you're going to call him a liar, amongst other things you called him, I'm going to go back to Norman Finkelstein and get him to respond to that.
Would you like me to respond now?
Yes, please. Yeah, I think it's only reasonable you should. Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure what was the purpose to inviting either me or Mr. Shmuley to this program, because obviously we are on two entirely different wavelengths. Mr. Shmuley is in the business, which is not surprising, of character assassination. He's in the business of libel. That's his job, because where he have to confront the facts, he would be in a very difficult situation. So let me make one clarification. None of my remarks bear on my personal opinions. I simply am repeating what the documentary record shows. Now, according to Mr. Shmuley, I am a liar because, according to Mr. Shmuley, the International Court of Justice explicitly concluded that Israel was not committing a genocide. Now, I would say that Mr. Shmuley is suffering from what I would call a Judeo-dementia, because there is no possibility on earth that any rational human being could have read the opinion or the ruling rendered by the International Court of Justice after the South Africa application and after the oral proceedings, there's no possibility on earth that any rational person can conclude that the International Court of Justice ruled that Israel was not committing a genocide. So we now have two difficulties. Number one, Mr. Shmuley seems to think his purpose to being on the program is to personally attack me, the Latin term ad hominem attacks. Number two, Rabbi Shmuley seems incapable of processing very basic facts. If Mr. Shmuley believes that the International Court of Justice ruled explicitly that Israel was not committing genocide, if that's what he truly believes, then I would say he's suffering from some form of Judeo-dementia.
Okay.
All right. There is a lot to unpack there. The part that really kind of jumped out at me because I wasn't expecting it was not any of the personal smears about Norm and his family, although, there's the Colin saying that, like, accusing the son of like Holocaust survivors who constantly speaks in like not only respectful but like reverential tones about his parents of like hating them because he's such an anti-Semite or whatever is pretty low. But I think that's, the thing that really jumped out at me because I wasn't expecting it is the thing about Lula, right? That's so crazy.
There's so much crazy shit in there that I could kind of forgot about that.
Yeah, I mean, so like, look, anybody who ever saw me on YouTube in like 2019, 2020 has heard me talk about this a bunch of times because I spent a lot of that time on the Michael Brooks show and, it came up all the time. So I'm not going to like spend a lot of time on it right now, but just like real quick here, right? Lula da Silva, currently president of Brazil, that, when he, was accused, like that corruption accusation, was a pretty transparent ploy to stop him from running for president a few years earlier because he was, leading in the polls. He probably would have won, beating, Jair Bolsonaro, who's like a ultra right wing fanatic, who's like whose family is like closely personally linked to like right-wing paramilitaries that when I interviewed Glenn Greenwald in I don't know 2020 or 2021 about this, and of course he lives in Brazil and he wrote a book about this, and like, Glenn told me that it's like you have to understand that like people talk about like the dangers of like you sort of hear those phrases, you might think of like the Proud Boys or something, but it's like those are like I don't know, like those are like people who carry swords at Renaissance fairs, right? Compared to the people in Brazil, right? Those are like real serious paramilitary organizations that like control territory the way that drug gangs do, that have assassinated politicians. And so it's like, yeah, this is like, if you care about democracy, like this thing should have mattered a lot to you. And it was pretty obviously a trumped up case. There was no direct, evidence that he this like apartment that Lula had supposedly, been like given as this like corruption thing, which is like, he could have bought himself that many times over if he cared about that. Like, and the reporting, right, from Glenn Greenwald and the Intercept Brazil, like the leaks, that they reported showed that in fact the prosecution of him was incredibly corrupt, and the judge Sergio Moro was like had all kinds of like communications with Bolsonaro about, okay, it's really important that we convict him to make sure he stays off the ballot. When that reporting came out, he was released, which is like a huge victory for global democracy. And literally, I don't even think, I mean, I know all this has nothing to do with Gaza, but I think it is telling, just because, like,
oh yeah,
I don't think Shmuley's even lying. I think he probably just like glanced at a headline once and saw that like Lula used to be in prison and like that's all he knows, right? And so he's like, oh, see,
even if Lula was guilty and he did that here, it probably would have been legal.
Yeah, it's probably true too.
But
totally. But yeah, it's like he has I'm sure, like, again, I don't even think he's lying. I just think he has no idea what he's talking about, but he's got this like lunatic confidence that on the basis of whatever sentence or two, something he glanced at, that it's like, oh yeah, see, he's corrupt. Why are you listening to him?
Yeah, on that, he's probably not lying. He's just like wrong,
Yeah.
But I mean, he also, so first of all, like, I just want to go through, because there is a lot at the beginning too that I don't want to like forget. First of all, just quickly, like he says, Norm Finkelstein, did he say Norm Finkelstein is the foremost Jewish anti-Semite on earth?
He did. Yes.
So like, I mean, if that's true, we're like in way better shape than I assumed,
Yeah, this is like, I remember years ago when people used to tell me in arguments that Jeremy Corbyn was like one of the worst anti-Semites on earth. And it's like, okay, but like, he's never done anything anti-Semitic. So if that's like the worst one, then anti-Semitism is not nearly the problem I thought it was.
It's like the story you told about him going up to the guy in the park, or the guy going up to him. He posts it like, look how bad this is. And it's like, really? That's the worst.
Like every normal person who watches it is like, I don't know. It kind of seems like you're harassing that kid at this point.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And then he also claims that Finkelstein, like, there's a specific claim being made here that Finkelstein said his parents were not victims, and that's what he says Finkelstein said, and that they just hated Germans and wanted them dead. And again, like,
do you even know what, like,
so it actually took some digging to figure out what he could have possibly been referring to, and I'm not even sure I found like the what I found is the closest thing that it could be. First of all, there's two claims being made here. First of all, Finkelstein never said his parents were not victims of the Holocaust. Like that, there's nothing to even dig for there. He just straight up never said that.
Obviously never said that. In fact,
or anything that could be like taken that way just never happened.
I mean, famously has referred many times to his parents being victims of the Holocaust, right? Like,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then he says they hated Germans and wanted them dead, like as if Finkelstein was saying that like that was the problem.
Right.
The closest thing I could find is that there are a couple, nothing in writing, first of all. It could be he wrote something I didn't come across, but the closest things I could find were interviews where he talked about how he once asked his mom how she felt about the fire bombings of Dresden, and she said that like at that point, like, we were suffering so much that like we wanted them to suffer, and like they just lied.
Which is a very natural human like feeling, which was his point, I think, when he said that.
Right. And exactly. And he keeps bringing up this thing about how like Finkelstein says his parents hated Germans, and Finkelstein's like anti-Semitic, and it's just like, like, why do you think that might be the case that his parents felt that way about that one thing, if that's even what he's talking about?
Yeah, which and I would, knowing Norm, I'd be very unsurprised if the kind of point he was making was like, okay, so like by analogy, if like Palestinians feel a certain way about things, whatever, then like I could understand why, just like my mom admitted to feeling this way once. And it's like, yeah, I've talked to Norman Finkelstein about his mom. I know how he felt about it. Like that's not the idea that I mean, like he or we have together, right? When he was on for the retrospective on the Dershowitz debate, right? Like he was like talking about how like he like agonizes over like what his mom would have made of like some of his decisions and all this stuff like this idea that he's bringing her up in a disrespectful way is just like utter craziness. And yeah, I mean it's just this is just really like bottom of the barrel stuff. Like at least like the thing where he the closest he came well, okay, so the two things he said that were kind of on topic were one of them was where he was quoting that Norm like Substack thing, which it's like, yeah, look, I mean, we've talked about this before. I disagree with that like initial Substack thing. I also think that it's like if you were actually going to talk about it, you'd be like, well, would you defend that? What do you think about that now, right? Like not like just sort of milking it in this weird televangelisty way to try to get some like emotional points off of it. And it's like, look, I've seen Norm in interviews say, yeah, he wouldn't have said some of those same things if he'd known everything he knows now. But also this claim that Shmuley's, did I hear him right? He said 400 Israeli women were shot in the genitals. Like the
exact quote is that on October 7th, quote, 400 women shot in the genitals, their breasts cut off.
Yeah. Okay. I don't need to hear the whole thing. Yeah. So it's like the total, last I saw, the total current estimate, and this is like this, I think, right, the official Israeli estimate of the number of Israeli civilians who were killed on October 7th is 695. So is his claim that 400 of those 695 civilians were women who were shot in the genitals?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's his claim. Yeah.
Sure. And then the other thing he said that was on topic, but like also was probably as Norm, I think, rightly pointed out in response, objectively the most insane thing he said was about the ICJ.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He claimed that the ICJ, quote, specifically ruled that Finkelstein used the word explicitly, but he actually said specifically ruled that Israel is not committing a genocide, which is obvious.
Which is wild, right? I mean, they haven't made any ruling on that one way or the other, but they did a preliminary ruling that said that plausibly, right? There was
committing a genocide, yeah,
right, yeah. There was like plausible danger of genocide, and so they had. I mean, the only thing that was true there that he said is the ICJ didn't order a ceasefire, which is not like the main thing South Africa was asking. It was like a little ambitious that they would get that at this stage in the process, but they haven't made a final ruling one way or the other about genocide. They gave it they did the preliminary ruling that said it was plausible, and because it was plausible, as Norm points out, they specifically ordered Israel to do a bunch of things to step away from the brink, of course, none of which they've actually done.
Yeah, he also he said that they said that the ICJ ruled that they would not do anything to halt the Israeli offensive, I think was the quote.
It's like, well, I mean, they have they ordered them to change their tactics and to stop, to clamp down on incitement and to like allow in all this humanitarian aid and all this stuff. And again, they just haven't done any of that, right? So it's like, yeah, they said there was a plausible, that like the genocide, that like again, haven't made a final ruling, but there was a preliminary ruling that said that there was a plausible concern of imminent genocide. And so they issued all of these instructions for things that Israel is supposed to do in response. So it's like he's on that one, he's completely phoning in from an alternate dimension.
Yeah, totally. And just quickly on the 400 women thing, like The Intercept has done really good reporting on this. Ben, you wrote something on this the other day. Like,
last week.
Are these reports, like, despite the numbers that are accepted, like the reports on this are really disputed, and there are also now super credible reports that the IDF is using, or at least soldiers have used sexual violence as a weapon against Palestinians. Not that like diminishes anything that has happened the other way, but like those reports about Hamas are extremely controversial right now.
Yeah, exactly. So they have
nobody is claiming 400 people on October 7th.
Like nobody says that. That's
even these controversial reports.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So there's the UN report that people have claimed. So, there's I guess to back up, right, there was the big thing was a few months ago, there was this major story in the New York Times, screams without words, how Hamas weaponized sexual assault on October 7th. And, since then, there was a UN report that was widely taken as a vindication, even though it doesn't really vindicate it if you actually read it. And also the they themselves said they didn't really have an investigative mandate, for that. They're just kind of collating what was already out there. So yeah, I mean, I think there's also been a UN report that said, I mean, I don't think they said anything too definitive about it, but they certainly mentioned they certainly mentioned allegations of rape committed by Israeli soldiers and other forms of sexual assault, and in Gaza. But it's the real, to my mind, right? And this is pretty much what, like, Ryan Grimm, who's like one of the reporters at the Intercept you mentioned, is pretty much what I've seen him say too, and it makes sense to me. To my mind, the question is not, was anybody raped on October 7th? I'd actually be pretty shocked if the answer to that was no, nobody, right? Because, having thousands of angry young male soldiers fan out across enemy territory, killing random people, etc., taking both soldiers and civilians hostages, all that stuff, and there being zero sexual assaults would, I mean, that would be pretty unprecedented in the history of war, right? Yeah. Like, I would be pretty surprised if that were the case. But the claim that there was systemic use, right? That was like directed by Hamas, that there was systemic use of rape as a weapon of war on October 7th, as opposed to, some Hamas fighters, committed sexual assaults. That is not really supported by current evidence. And, I think I don't know. I mean, I understand people having reactions, like, kind of distasteful to like go through and like, adjudicate some of this in this way. But I think given the high stakes and the way that, and certainly the counter atrocities that it's used to justify, I think we should be like really careful about this stuff. And it's just not, right now the evidence just isn't there. The New York Times report, there are, a bunch of problems with one of the three reporters whose bylines are on that. Like, one of them is like a real respected New York Times reporter, but another one is a Israeli filmmaker who used to work as like in the intelligence division of the Israeli Air Force and had no relevant journalistic experience. And, there's some evidence from her social media feeds that she has extreme right-wing views. And the third one was her nephew. So it's just, it's just not, and then like the main case they used as evidence in that article, the family of the alleged victim, or I mean, she's definitely a murder victim, but like the family of the alleged rape victim, have all said, no, we don't believe that. And we really wouldn't have talked to these people if we'd understood that they were like going to emphasize this angle. So, it's just, I think the state of evidence there, even for what was being claimed in the New York Times article is certainly just, not there. And again, like, just like when you talk about the cases of Israeli soldiers committing rape, it's like, I wouldn't say there either. It's like, look, I wouldn't just jump to the conclusion that this was like Israeli military policy without some pretty serious evidence, right? Like,
yeah, I doubt it.
And I haven't, so it's like, yeah, I think you should just apply the same standards of evidence. And, so I don't, and like, that's even for what the New York Times story was claiming. But like, even the New York Times story, it's like, it's not like the New York Times said 400 women were shot in the genitals, and then the rest of that extremely disturbing snuff porn that like Rabbi Shmuley continued to describe, like, after he said that, right? It's like that this happened to 400 women. I mean, this just
on that one day. Yeah.
On that. Yeah. It's just like, I mean, obviously Norm has is on the edgy end of the old Jewish man sense of humor with the like Judeo dementia thing, but like it's a, I think he's allowed, but like, this is some kind of dementia. I mean, this is just like not in touch. Like this is just somebody who feels completely comfortable just saying whatever pops into his head.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, the ICJ claim is particularly shocking that he didn't at least like, Google this before he came on the show. Like he hasn't seen anything about the ICJ ruling.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like the only way that he's not lying his ass off is if he just accepts invitations to go on TV to talk about this stuff, but like just, does not do the most basic research, that he maybe like sees some tweets with headlines about articles or like hears people mention them and like just doesn't look anything up.
Right. Yeah.
So,
also, he said that the only, what is it? The most or the only interesting thing about Finkelstein is that he needs a psychiatrist. I feel like I know this is low hanging fruit, but like, I just want to point out that like, one could be convinced of that about Finkelstein and still not like take issue with his scholarship much, like still respect the work he's done on God,
Yeah. Look, I mean,
plenty of great people who fucking see a psychiatrist.
Yeah. I think Norm has a pretty, in my sense, has always been on and off air that he's pretty, I think he acknowledges his own level of quirkiness and has a sense of humor about it, right? Like, this is like but whatever conversations might go on between Norm and a therapist, I don't think it has a goddamn thing to do with the kind of commentary and also scholarship he does, which is, whatever else you want to say. I mean, the man is the polar opposite of Shmuley on this. I mean, he will exhaustively do his homework. I mean, like that, when he has, when he was debating Alan Dershowitz, which, my God, I mean, compared to this, that was like, watching like Socrates and Protagoras, like go back and forth about, the nature of justice, in the Forum at Athens. Like, this is, but like there, right? Like, I mean, he was, like he had like the page number of like every time that, that Dershowitz had said something that was wrong in his book. Like, this,
he might need a psychiatrist just from working so much,
from
studying too hard.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, this is like honestly, the psychiatric symptom here is like the neurotic obsession with like tracking down every detail about this stuff, which is, definitely not a problem that Shmuley is suffering from.
Right. Yeah.
Let me bring in.
May I respond?
Yes, you may. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Piers. You know, it's interesting, Piers, that you and Norm are saying that I went ad hominem. No, I did not. I quoted his own words of Jewish anti-Semitism, vitriol, which are so extreme that they're shocking. I told you, he called his own parents haters of Germans. Not the Germans hated his parents and annihilated his family. His parents hated the Germans. But now he just now says, I suffer from Jewish dementia. Notice, it's not Shmuley who suffers dementia. It's always Jewish dementia. It's always Jews. Norman Finkelstein has now accused Israel of 5 different genocides. 1982, he accused Israel of genocide in Lebanon. It went on 2006, 2009, 2015. Now, this is the 5th. That means we Jews, I always thought Jews suck at sports and PR. We suck at genocide because we've attempted it 5 times, and yet in all the Arab-Israeli wars, Jews and Arabs together, the numbers that have died, including terrorists, are less than 100,000. Bashar al-Assad next door killed 600,000 in 2 years. We Jews ought to go to him and ask him, how do we finally do this? Because according to Norm, we've tried it for 30 years and we can't do it. In fact, since 1967, when Gaza came under Israeli control, the population of Gaza grew by 1 million people. How is that a genocide? Now, when Norm says that the ICJ said that Israel's committing a genocide, I repeat, Norm, respectfully, you are a fabricator. They said specifically that Israel has an obligation not to. South Africa asked for a cessation of hostilities. They refused. They repeated that refusal last week. How you could get on this program and actually fabricate, well, I guess I know why, because even your mentors, Chicago professor Peter Nozick, calls your scholarship, quote, trash. And this is trash because anyone can Google what we're saying.
Yeah, but Rabbi Shmuley, look, I'm going to jump in again because, again, what you're doing is attacking your other debater here.
He said I suffer from dementia, for God's sake. Why don't you call him out on that? Dementia? Seriously?
With respect, what you're not doing is answering the specific questions. There are many, many people around the world increasingly concerned about the scale of Israel's response, the appalling death toll of children, the appalling number of children also being orphaned, the appalling number of women being killed, innocent women, and they don't see an end game. They just see Israel continuing to bomb, kill. But how does this end? If the next stage is Rafah, which now has 6 times as many people in it as it did 4 months ago, and is a huge refugee camp, and you're trying to find just a few thousand Hamas amongst over 1.5 million people, then you're going to get even more people around the world saying this is a senseless way of conducting war. Now, what do you say?
I hear you. Okay, in the lifetime of your parents, the greatest statesman of the 20th century, Winston Churchill, fought the greatest evil the world had ever seen. Now, the Americans used something called a Norden bomb sight, and they only bombed during the day, and they lost so many crews as a result. It's a phenomenal new Apple series called Masters of the Air that shows this. The British came to the Americans and said, are you guys crazy? You're sending your pilots to die during the day? And the Americans said, well, we want to make sure we are not hitting civilians. We're hitting military sites with this it was the second greatest invention after the atomic bomb of the Second World War, the Norden bomb sight. That's not what you and the British did. You bombed at night indiscriminately, murdering millions of civilians. So by the definition of Norman Finkelstein, who says that whether you intentionally target civilians, which Israel does not, Israel loses hundreds of soldiers.
But the whole point,
with surgical strikes.
Rabbi
Wait, no, but I'm asking, but I need to put one question to Norman Finkelstein.
Let me respond to your argument.
Was Britain a terrorist state fighting the Nazis?
Okay,
yes or no?
I will come to
indiscriminate.
Yes,
I'd like to hear his response.
Let me ask Norman that. What I would say to that, for what it's worth, is that there was huge regret over things like the carpet bombing of Dresden, which led directly
to Cologne, Essen, Dresden.
Which
Dresden
led directly, by the way.
It was April 1945.
I'm just saying,
let's go to Cologne. Let's go to Dresden. Let's go to Hamburg.
Let me finish.
Yes.
Which led directly to the Geneva Convention to try and prevent these things happening again. Many people think what's happening now in Gaza is a form of that happening again. Norman Finkelstein.
No. What's happening in Gaza is what the Americans did with a Norden bomb site. The Israelis are using surgical targeted strikes.
Well, they're killing a lot of children.
Because Hamas lives under their homes.
If Israel's
Hamas builds.
Rabbi Shmuley, with respect, if Israel's being that precise, why is it killing so many children?
Firstly, I want to know what is the accuracy of your numbers, because I trust Hamas as much as I trust they're complete liars. Secondly, Hamas, unfortunately, wants these children to die, because the more that die, the more you're going to challenge me on TV. Israel wants them to live. Israel withdrew in 2005. Hamas builds their military installations under these children's homes, under their kindergartens, under their nurseries, under their hospitals.
All right,
we now found 350 miles of tunnels under children's homes. That's the size of the New York subway system.
I want to be fair to both sides on time. Norm Finkelstein, your response.
What would you like me to respond to?
I suppose the analogy with World War II and the fact that indisputably, many hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of civilians died in that conflict. And the argument is it was for the greater good of defeating the Nazis. Do you see any parallel with wanting, and I completely understand Israel's desire, fervent desire, to eliminate Hamas after what they did on October the 7th, particularly as Hamas has stated again and again, they want to keep repeating it again and again. So on that particular argument about when you wage a war against whether it's the Nazis or Hamas, a lot of civilians tragically will get killed in the process, but ultimately that shouldn't stop you going ahead with the war to try and achieve your goal. What do you say to that?
What I would say to that is there's a very good reason why this case was brought before the International Court of Justice. That is, as I'm sure you know, that if you examine what Israel has done in Gaza since October 7th, by virtually every dimension you examine it, the intensity of the bombing, the density of the bombing, the magnitude of destruction of civilian dwellings, civilian infrastructure, the percentage, the absolute number of children killed, the relative number of children killed to combatants killed, the percentage of women and children versus men killed, the number of medical personnel killed, the number of journalists killed, the number of UN workers killed. By virtually every dimension that you examine the conflict, by virtually any and every metric that you examine the conflict, Israel's assault on Gaza, which we should bear in mind is among the most densely populated places on God's earth, and it has been sealed off from humanity since 2006. As Giora Island put it in March 2004, Giora Island was the head of the Israeli National Security Council. He described Gaza, and I'm quoting him now, as a huge concentration camp. That's not me, that's Giora Island, the former head of the Israeli National Security Council. So if you put all of these metrics together and you put in and you add in the context being a concentration camp in which half the people are children, 70% are refugees. If you add in the context and the metrics, there is a very good reason why Israel was brought before the International Court of Justice. Now, Mr. Shmuley has every right to question the authority of the numbers, the figures, and so forth. I am a strong believer in the right of Holocaust deniers to make a case before the public, because, as John Stuart Mill once put it, we are all fallible, and being fallible, we have to always have a place in our minds open to the possibility that we are wrong. So, like Holocaust deniers, I do believe that Rabbi Mr. Shmuley should have the right to speak. However, granting that right, he has a very tall order. If a Holocaust denier wants to deny the Nazi Holocaust, he or she has to refute a vast corpus of scholarship attesting to the reality of the Nazi Holocaust. In the same way, Rabbi Shmuley, if he wants to deny that a plausible case for genocide can be made in Gaza, he has to refute a vast body of documentation. And that documentation ran, as it was presented by the South African application, it ran to 84 single-spaced pages with literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of footnotes. Now, that's the first hurdle.
Are we really just
allow
gonna
me
Are we going to allow
me to
Professor,
finish.
Come on. No.
Allow me to finish.
Your debating style is to drone on, coma-inducing. That's how you debate. You try to put your opponents into slumber. For God's sake, you made your point. It's time for me to respond. That's a dialogue.
No,
you
I'm not.
Dominate this
done.
debate
I'm not.
like you did with Alan Dershowitz, and you dominated. You took 3/4 of the time. I won't allow it. Now let me respond. First of all, Piers, I'm glad that Norm has at least had the intellectual honesty to concede the first point, that the ICJ, the International Court, never ruled against Israel. Now notice he's saying that South Africa brought the case. They lost the case. First point.
Yeah, this is really insane that like he either doesn't know that they haven't made their final ruling yet, and that the preliminary ruling they gave South Africa most of what they wanted and said that there was a plausible case, or he's just lying about it. And honestly, I don't know which would be worse, like to just sort of consciously lie about something like that and hope that nobody that like you can like confuse people into thinking that, or to start from or to just like literally pay so little attention that you think this is true and nevertheless like go on TV where, God knows how many people are going to see you running your mouth about this.
Yeah. I mean, I think the first one is definitely worse, but like they're both pretty bad. It's not that much better if he just doesn't know. But
I mean, in some ways, it's like, God, I mean, that is almost worse. It's like the point.
You think so?
I mean,
morally?
More like, I guess it's not, but it's like there is something that's sort of more disturbing about it almost. Like it's like the point. Do you remember when the guy on the shirts, and no, somebody asked about this in the chat. This was not planned, but they have but when Chomsky had that weird email exchange many years ago with Sam Harris.
Yeah.
And that like ends with Harris being like, "I was okay if I published this," and Chomsky's like, "I have no idea why you do that, but fine."
Yeah.
At like one of the point, like so Harris was like trying to push, the U.S. and Israel are better than the terrorists because we don't, when we kill civilians, it's just an accident, we don't mean to, and
worst example.
And Chomsky's, and Chomsky's response is like, there's a point in Chomsky's response where he's like, well, that's kind of even worse, right? If you have like, you don't even meet, like, you're just totally indifferent to somebody's life, it's like they have that you just sort of see them as a bug, you can step on in the sidewalk, right? Like that there's something that's even more disturbing than than like consciously murdering them, and like the same like structure of the point I feel like applies here. as much as it's like, yes, I would probably agree at the end of the day that it'd be worse to be consciously lying about it. There's like something that's almost even more disturbing about being so totally indifferent to the truth that, like, you're gonna go on TV and you're gonna, it's like, all these people are gonna see you talk about this, and it's like you just cannot be bothered to like skim over one article about this.
Dude, also in that exchange with Chomsky, like the main example Harris used about how we like vet for whether they're citizens or military targets was Clinton bombing the pharmaceutical plant in Sudan. Which was like, it's a similar thing where it's like you're saying the opposite of what the thing showed. Like this was a case where actually they were briefed on what they were targeting, on the fact that there'd be civilians there, and also on the consequences from doing it. But like, yeah, it's a similar thing where like the documentation showed the opposite of what the person is saying it showed. Also, like, there's just so many, like, can I just go through like a list of a few?
Yeah, do the list. This is a good time for that. I should also say, by the way, just before, because I actually meant to say this earlier, that that like one of the many insane things that Shmuley said before the first time we paused that I totally forgot to comment on was that, like, oh, see, I guess Jews are news. There's the, Israel's such a tiny country, it gets so much attention. And it's like, okay, above and beyond everything else that's wrong with that, right? That like that the, United States wasn't like doing like emergency weapons shipments to Bashar al-Assad to like help him commit his crimes more quickly. And so obviously as an American, crimes that are committed directly or by proxy, by the United States should be higher political priorities for us, et cetera, et cetera. All the reasons why somebody like, Norm, would be particularly incensed by Israel committing these crimes and sort of, in the, kind of name of, Jews everywhere, of like, using, Holocaust survivors like his parents, as like propaganda, all that stuff. Like, put all that aside. Like, that's the stuff that would apply to any time that Israel's bombing people. But like right now, specifically, you're going to do the, I guess Jews are news. Like, this is now, these are the worst war crimes that's being committed by anybody on the planet. Like, this is literally, Gaza is right now the, 20, however many miles it is, of the world where it's the most dangerous to be a child, right? Like, this is, it's like, that's,
I mean,
under those circumstances, you're going to pull this shit.
Yeah. Right. In the first 3 weeks, more children killed than in the previous 3 years in any war zone combined on the planet.
Yeah.
Also, exactly. I forgot to mention just at the beginning, Piers Morgan goes through the, like, you said you're going to digitally decapitate, disembowel, whatever. And then Shmuley's like, do you mind if I call you Norm? That was pretty fucking good.
Yeah, that is amazing. But anyway, I cut you off. Let's do the list. I want to hear the whole. Yeah. So
some of these are small, some of them are bigger. He, in response to being accused of quote attacking at Norm ad hominem, he says, I quoted Finkelstein's own words of Jewish anti-Semitism. And he goes on, but like that's actually not what he did. He quoted one thing that Norm never said, and then a bunch of things of other people talking shit about Norm.
Right.
Then the next thing is because now I'm gonna do it to him now digitally. But he says Norman Finkelstein has accused Israel of 5 different genocides. 1982. In Lebanon, 2006, 2009, 2015, and this is the 5th. And that's like, again, these days it's hard to make a claim like I'm about to make because people are everywhere on all kinds of platforms. Finkelstein has a lot of books, but like That's, as far as I know, that's just not true. I don't think Finkelstein has applied the term. First of all, I don't think he applied that term in 1982. But if he did, that, like, he was pretty young and,
Yeah.
whatever. Like, I certainly used words at, like, protest events that I might not use now when I was, like, first getting involved in politics or whatever. But I don't think he said that about Lebanon. And I don't think he said it about any of the other cases. He also said Bashar al-Assad killed 600,000 people in 2 years. I could be wrong about this, but my understanding is that those are the high estimates of how many people have been killed in the last 10 years in Syria. And it ranges from about 350,000 to 650,000, basically, since not the last 10 years, but since the beginning of the war. And then there's another thing where he says, like, this is a bullshit argument that lots of people like Ben Shapiro and others are making about how because since 1967, when Israel began its occupation, the population of Gaza grew by 1 million people. Therefore, it's not a genocide.
Right.
This is just like an increasingly frustrating claim. First of all, like, I mean, it's so dumb. It's like almost hard to respond to. But I think that, first of all, the population of the planet has grown quite a bit since then. And also, like, people.
Well, it's also what's sorry, but just on this specifically,
Yeah.
like what's the claim that this is even supposed to be a response to? Is this the claim? In other words, like, is the claim that over the course of that entire period, Israel's been committing genocide, right? Or that, like, something that they did,
No.
right?
Yeah.
Like, you see what I'm saying? It's like they have because it's like, at best, that could maybe counter the claim that Israel has been continuously committing genocide for that entire time, right? That the population growth was happening, but it has absolutely nothing to do with the sort of, like, specific allegations, like what Israel's been doing for the last 5 months in Gaza is genocide. Right. Like, that's just a separate issue. Also, by the way, on the Lebanon point, look, I mean, Norm may have used that rhetoric. I saw somebody in the chat. Oh, RXT, I found it, right. So he says that there's a picture of Norm holding a sign in 1982 that says, stop the Holocaust in Lebanon. But you know what's funny about that? Do you know who else used Holocaust analogies to describe the Israeli war crimes in Lebanon?
I don't know. I could make some guesses, but no.
You're not going to get it.
Yeah.
Ronald Reagan.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. Like in his diary, like, Reagan says, like, he describes calling, Menachem Begin, then the Israeli prime minister, to tell him that he had to stop. And he said he specifically used the word Holocaust to describe it, in the conversation, and Begin objected to it, so
that's from the I know what picture that's about. That's from the documentary about Norman Finkelstein, with a picture of him carrying a sign that is funny because the sign has a lot of writing on it. Like, it's meant to be like a protest sign, but there's like a paragraph of writing on it. Like, you can't read it from 50 feet away. And
yeah, that sounds very on brand for Norm. There's also, just on this specific point, I say Tom from Yakubi in chat says, do you know the native population of Oklahoma skyrocketed in the 1830s? Do you call that a genocide? So it's like, yeah, I think that's a good point. I think, like, what some of this is getting at is that the word genocide, like, I think the sort of man on the street definition and the legal definition are really different, right? In other words, like, that I think the sort of man on the street definition of genocide is like, you're trying to kill every single member of a group. And, because people think of, the Holocaust as the sort of, defining genocide, but, like, the actual UN convention that, sort of sets international law on this casts a much wider net than that, right? And it would include, like, trying to either assimilate or like ethnically cleanse and like, you know, like expel all the members of the group from an area. It definitely includes things like that, which definitely applies to Native Americans in Oklahoma and, you know, the early 1800s. And it, you know, I would say it definitely applies to Gaza now.
But also, like, even if we assume that that picture is what Shmuley is talking about, like, it's still a lie. Like, he still claims that that Finkelstein said this 3 other times, that time and this time. And if we accept that, like, that instance is this case of Finkelstein as a young man getting involved in politics for the first time on this conflict, by the way, that was when he first got involved in studying this issue, was 1982. Holding a sign up at a protest, like, if we give him the benefit of the doubt and assume that's what Shmuley's talking about, like, he's still lying about 2006, 2009, 2015, you know?
Yeah, and actually, I just looked it up. You know, because you kept saying young man. I was like, how old was Norm in 1982? And yeah, you're right. He wasn't even 30 yet.
He wasn't. And it, like, he's written and talked about how it was his first venture, probably not into politics in general, but
into this issue.
Issue.
No, so, yeah, like, and look, I mean, if somebody looked up all of the hyperbolic things that, like, I ever said, like, when I was, you know, arguing about politics or going to protests in like my 20s,
yeah,
like, I'm sure, like, and, you know, I'm sure I could not begin to defend everything on the list, because that's just kind of the nature of the beast. But yeah, I'm sorry. So I got you off track. So you had a list, like the item we were on was the,
totally agree. Same here. Yeah, same here. About that point. And well, I think those were the main things. I mean, I also think it's funny that he says that the Americans only bombed during the day in World War II, and that, which he got all this news about the Norden bomb site from an Apple TV series called Masters of the Air, which he admits in this debate, and then claims that the Norden bomb site was the second greatest invention after World War II, behind only the atomic bomb.
Yeah, the whole thing is wild, like, because as with the 400 women who were shot in the genitals, like, Shmuley's version of every talking point he's done is always, like, literally many times crazier than, like, all the other versions of that talking point I've heard. Because like, it's like he's a member of an improv troupe, and it's like everybody's like everybody's trying to, like, be kind of mad, and he's like screaming at the top of his lungs, right? It's like he's just not even on the same page as he's supposed to be for this. So
all the craziest shit comes out, you know, like,
yeah, like he says, so on this thing about, you know, Allied bombing in World War II, it's like, yeah, in general, it's been crazy to me to see the way that everybody's been talking about this since October 7th, that I've seen so many Israeli apologists and Israeli officials bring up Dresden, Hiroshima, the Allied bombing of German cities in this way that's like, suggests that it's like, okay, well, that was all fine, therefore what we're doing is fine.
In response to October 7th, which could be used. I mean, sorry to cut you off.
No, totally, right? You could
think about it the same way, yeah.
Totally. Why not? Right. I mean, it's like, if, you know, good for the goose is good for the gander. I mean, if you're going to use that argument that it's like, oh, well, you know, the Allies killed lots of German civilians and Japanese civilians, therefore it's fine to kill lots of civilians in a just cause. It's like, well, yeah, why couldn't Hamas use that to justify like the worst things that they did on October 7th?
They do. That's your argument. Yeah,
exactly. It's the identical argument. I mean, I would reject it in all cases, but I mean, it's like it is funny how it's the fact that it's like that exact argument could be used in the other direction never seems to occur to them. But it's like, yeah, like, I find that argument really disturbing because, like, look, you're literally going back to before the current laws of war were written, because, this is, the Second Geneva Conventions, 1947, which which is really what governs like what counts as a war crime in the context of this kind of war. And like the whole reason that happened was because of a widespread sense that like we're never going to fight another war again the way that we fought World War II, right? Like this is because it was so bad, right? And so you're going back to that and saying, see, this is no worse than that. That seems wild to me. Like this is, I always thought that like, oh yeah, by the 2020s, everybody's kind of admitted that, I mean, yes, obviously I'm glad the Allies won World War II, et cetera. But it's like, I thought by the 2020s, everybody kind of admitted that, yeah, the Allied bombing of Germany did go way too far. And we did commit some real serious war crimes like that. Like Dresden, for example, which was, by the way, controversial even at the time that it happened. It was widely criticized in the Allied.
To achieve any military objectives.
Lots of people, were criticizing it in Allied countries at the time that it happened, but it's like, yeah, look, I think I would just think any normie who's read Kurt Vonnegut thinks that like Dresden was like a horrifying war crime, right? And so it's like that is itself disturbing to see, but then Shmuley has to put his own completely crazy twist on it and be like, oh yeah, well the Brits were doing that. But America, was like being super careful about not killing German civilians. Like, wait, it was?
Yeah. He needs all these contradictions and lies in order for each of them to work. Like he needs another one. Like what you were saying before about like in order for this, since 1967, the population of Gaza grew by 1 million. Like in order for that to matter at all, he has to claim that Finkelstein claimed there was a genocide 5 times in that period,
right?
And it just gets so crazy that it's like, you're like an anti-Semite who hates Germans. Your family hates Germans, it's just
no, it is
all over the place and like open, like brazenly contradictory, I think more so even as we'll go on. But yeah, glaring contradictions.
Because I've been attacking his credibility. For you to say, Piers, I'm attacking him ad hominem, his personality, I'm not. The question is whether this man is a scholar or not. He has no tenure. He was denied tenure at DePaul University. He is only known because he's a Jewish anti-Semite. Now, number 2, this is the 5th time he accused Israel of genocide. He started in 1982 in Lebanon. Now, what does genocide mean? It was coined by a Holocaust survivor in 1947 named Raphael Lemkin. Geno is an ethnicity. Side means murder. It is the murder of an ethnicity. Norm needs to make the case that Israel is slaughtering Palestinians because they're Palestinians and Arabs and Muslims. Well, then how does Israel have 1.9 million totally safe Israeli citizens who vote in the Knesset, an Israeli Arab judge who put an Israeli Arab judge who put an Israeli Jewish president in jail for rape, by the way? Why is that none of the Israeli Arabs have risen up to stop this genocide? Because it has nothing to do with
all right, but let me ask you this.
It has to do with a date called October 7th.
Let me ask you this.
1,200 Jews were shot in the genitals, burned to death, slaughtered, and no democracy should allow that, except for one person. Norm Finkelstein.
No.
Because he has an irrational hatred of Jews.
Rabbi Shmuley, with respect, Norman Finkelstein is not the only person seriously concerned about what's happening in terms of Israel's response.
Genocide? Using the word genocide?
I would say the majority of the world right now is concerned about what's going on in Gaza.
Is President Biden
and believes that Israel's response is now becoming wholly disproportionate. And again, I ask you this question. Netanyahu, incredibly unpopular back home in Israel, probably wouldn't even be prime minister now if it hadn't been for this war, given the scale of the social unrest and protests over his attempt to thwart the power of the Supreme Court. So you've got a deeply unpopular prime minister, particularly with Israelis' own people, right, waging a war, and many people cynically think he's just going to keep doing this because it buys him more time. But if I could ask him, and I can't because he won't come on again on this program to date, I would simply say, when does this end? How many people are you prepared to kill on the other side before you declare mission accomplished? And why would you think, by the way, that killing so many innocent people in Gaza and destroying so much of the homes in Gaza, north and south, why would you think that that would end radicalization of people who may be sympathetic to Hamas? Why would it not have the opposite effect?
When I saw you face to face in your studio in London a few months ago, I told you I think that you've been fair on this conflict. So I respect your question and I want to take it seriously. First of all, Netanyahu's unpopularity means nothing. Churchill destroyed the Nazis, saved Western civilization, and immediately was kicked out by the British. He actually lost the election, as you well know. So that means nothing. It doesn't mean Churchill wasn't a great man. It means that it means nothing. Number two, let's say, for example, look where I am. I'm in the beauty of South Florida. This is where I grew up. Imagine that 6 million Jews living in Israel say, you know what, we've had it. We've tried this state 75 years. The whole world hates us. They want to kill us. We have people like Norman Finkelstein calling us satanic, saying that we come from a boil of hell. We have Norman Finkelstein saying that he cheered hallelujah when the women were shot in the genitals and raped. So we're going to move to South Florida. They do a deal with Biden. Biden says, you know, it's cheaper for us to just move you guys to beautiful Florida than it is to give Israel. And Israel disappears, God forbid, in a very humanitarian way. No one dies. Now you're left with no Israel. Will that change for one moment, Piers? All of the women in Gaza now under Hamas, the teenage girls who have tires put around their heads, who are burned to death by their brothers because they have sex before marriage. Will it change the fact that LGBTQ Palestinians have their genitals cut off and are castrated? Will it change the fact that any political protests on the part of Palestinians, no Israel anymore, against Hamas, have them shot 20 or 30 at a time by hooded terrorists? Will it change the fact that Palestinian Authority officials, their fellow are thrown off rooftops by Hamas, who did this in 2006 in a coup? Will it change the fact that there isn't one Arab democracy? Will it change the fact that in Syria, 600,000 Arabs, 600,000, Norm Finkelstein doesn't give a damn about them, were killed between 2011 and 2014? Israel is not the problem. Arab dictatorships, tyranny. Would it change the fact that Ismail Haniyeh is worth $4 billion? Would it change the fact that Khalid Mashal is worth $7 billion? It would change nothing. If Israel left the Middle East, the Arab world is still in crisis, killing teenagers, killing LGBTQ, destroying democracy, all dictatorship, kleptocracy. You have Mahmoud Abbas, who's a billionaire. You have Yasser Arafat, who not only died on the Forbes 400 richest men in the world, which is shocking, but his wife still lives in a penthouse paid for by the Palestinians in Paris. And one final thing, when Norman Finkelstein fabricates and says about the terrible plight of the Palestinians in Gaza, they were given about $100 billion over the past 18 years. More that is triple per capita what the Marshall Plan was given to Europeans. Look what they did with it: Germany, France, England. And you know what the Palestinians did with it? With what Hamas? They built tunnels with giant television screens where the Hamas Hitler, Yahya Ayash, is living now with his family. They didn't build one bomb shelter.
Let me go to Norman Finkelstein. Norman, the question I would have for you is this. Do you accept that Hamas need to be removed from power in Gaza?
I would say that the preeminent, I would say that the preeminent question at the present moment ought to be, do I accept the fact that the Israeli government ought to be removed from power?
Well, hang on. That's a different question. No, with respect, that's a different question. I can ask you that separately. But the specific question I have for you.
Okay, I meant to go longer before pausing, but this little interaction right here drives me crazy because, I mean, maybe Norm could have phrased it differently to sort of avoid misinterpretation, maybe, but like it seems like his point here is pretty clear and he's not changing the subject, right? Like he's saying, why is that question different? Right? Like, in other words, like, if we're trying to figure out how we'd answer the first question, let's make sure we're being consistent here, and that we'd answer the second one, say the second one differently. Like, you say, yes, Hamas has committed terrible crimes. Fine. Israel's committed, atrocities on a far greater scale. So if you say, because Hamas has committed crimes, therefore, right, they need to be removed, and that justifies everything, then what would be justified to remove the Israeli government that's committed, like, again, far more massive scale atrocities?
And I think, like, as we go on, I think we'll probably agree that, like, Piers becomes increasingly disingenuous about the way that he's asking this question, which I won't, like, spoil, like, but
before we do go on, I know you'd mentioned that I think you had
there were just a couple things I didn't get to before that, like, I think are important. So he claims that Hamas builds their military installations under these children's homes, kindergartens, nurseries, hospitals. And he says, we've now found 350 miles of tunnels under children's homes specifically. And that's the size of the New York subway system, which is actually 665 miles. So, like, he's literally wrong about everything. Like, even the smallest details are, like, way, like you said before, just, like, way blown out of proportion. Like, however many miles the New York subway system is, it's going to be twice that if Shmuley is telling you how big it is.
Yeah, and this is the entire area of Gaza is about 141 square miles, right? This is I literally just looked this up, right? They have because I wanted to make sure I was remembering this right, and like the Gaza Strip is 25 miles long, and between 3.7 and 7.5 miles wide, right? So it's like they have so within that area, you've got the 350 miles of tunnels. Yeah. That's like, is this Doctor Who? Is this the TARDIS? It's like bigger on the inside than the outside.
And he's just so confident too. That's the size of the New York subway system. Like, you got the first thing wrong, you got the second thing wrong. Like, you just fucking blundered through the whole thing. And then all right. So then the next thing is less important. He says that Finkelstein took 3/4 of the time in the debate with Dershowitz. I mean, I feel like that's a really easy one that anybody can check, and quickly do the math.
Do you actually have the math on that?
I should have gotten it, but I don't.
Okay, no, I'm curious now. So if anybody could actually track this down, because we watched that entire debate, that certainly wasn't my impression, but I would actually love it if somebody added up. There's no way.
Yeah.
That
3/4. No
3/4. So you're saying that Norm talked for like literally 3 times as long?
If anything, I think it's the other direction.
I mean, like, my impression of that debate was that Dershowitz was interrupting him like every 2 sentences.
And his only strategy was to, like, run out the clock.
Yeah, exactly.
With him being there. But, and then he says, the ICJ never ruled against Israel, and Finkelstein conceded that. That's, again, like 2 lies in one shot. Like, yes, they didn't rule that Israel's committing a genocide, but they did not rule, like, in Israel's favor.
No, and not in any way. I mean, the only thing
did not concede this point. Shmuley's been insisting on the whole time that they explicitly ruled that Israel is not committing a genocide.
Yeah, I mean, in what sense could you possibly spin the rule in that way? They have
by saying that South Africa, quote, lost the ICJ case. He used the word they lost that case.
Right. So first he thinks the case is over.
Right. Yeah.
Like, because if he thinks they lost,
won. Yeah.
Right. But then, like, second, like, the Israelis were outraged by that ruling, right? Like, this is the like, and you can see why, right? Because they said that there was a plausible risk of genocide, which is like on the, I mean, in terms of the things they ordered Israel to do, you could say Israel, South Africa didn't get everything they wanted because they didn't order an immediate ceasefire. But like in terms of the substance of South Africa's allegations, I mean, that, the preliminary ruling was as much in their favor as it possibly could have been.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Because they're not at this stage, they can't make a determination, like decisive determination, but
take years.
Yeah, they said there was they said that, that they'd presented enough to make it a plausible risk, and that therefore Israel had to do all of these different measures to, step back from the brink. And yeah, this is just, it is genuinely wild that he keeps saying that. And it kind of makes me wonder if he really does think that, like, if this is,
I think he just misread. You ever like look at an email real quick?
Yeah, exactly.
And you like for some reason think it said the opposite. Like, I feel like that's what he did here somehow. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
Oh my God.
It's also crazy because he said, oh my God, he said earlier that only Norm, like he just forgot about the ICJ at one point in the conversation, because he said only Norm Finkelstein,
the
genocide.
Right. That was another one. Yeah. That was another one that, like, I think if you Google like Israel genocide, probably Finkelstein is not even one of the first things that comes up. I haven't tested that, but like,
no, I would be very surprised if Finkelstein was one of the first things that comes up. I mean, I would think that, I don't know. I mean, it's also tricky because you'd have to do a private browser window, because it's like the algorithm learns what you're interested in.
Right, yeah.
But I would think that the first bunch of results would all be about the South African case at the ICJ. I'd be very surprised if Finkelstein was in the top 5.
Right. Like, even just to say that Finkelstein's the only one accusing them of it, like, even if you believe that the ICJ ruling was that explicitly Israel is not, like, you're talking about something in which another party accused them of genocide. Like,
yeah, like if nothing else, that like the nation of South Africa brought this case to court, that that like every Palestinian institution has like made the same claim, right? That all these other countries have like supported the South African claim. Like, this is, you talked about Lula earlier, right?
that Finkelstein is not representing South Africa at The Hague.
Right. Exactly. At least the initial rumor that Israel was going to be represented by Alan Dershowitz didn't come true, which would have been hilarious.
I mean, South Africa would have to pick Finkelstein if.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh God.
Particularly given what you said after October the 7th, is simply, should Hamas remain in power?
And should Hamas remain in power, I think that the Palestinian people should be able to determine their own future and determine their leadership. That's just the basic democratic
What is your
principle.
personal opinion?
No, I don't decide what people should do with their lives.
You've expressed many strong opinions about. Hang on. Rabbi Shmuley, I can do an interview. Thank you. Norm Finkelstein, the problem I have with that response is you're very quick to level the charge of genocide at Israel, and many people would agree with you, many wouldn't. But you're not so keen to be held to account for your view about Hamas. And I don't see how anyone, after what they did on October the 7th, could possibly conclude they should stay in power.
Piers, I don't want to have to redo the interviews you did with me. I was very clear about my opinion when you asked about October 7th. I was also very clear as to what I believe Hamas should or shouldn't do regarding its leadership or its current power in Gaza. I've not tried to evade any of your questions.
Okay, well, just for those who, for those who may not have seen the previous interviews, for those who may not have seen our previous conversations, I simply ask again.
That's fine.
It is a simple question. Should Hamas stay in power? Because Israel's whole argument is that they have to keep going with this warfare to eradicate Hamas. And my question for you is, do you think that in principle Hamas should stay in power?
Well, Piers, I'm going to answer you because I never fear the truth, and I'm not going to try to evade your question. Let's take a simple metric. We'll take the question of children killed.
Oh my God,
October
answer the
7th,
question. Should Hamas stay in power?
These are answers to different questions.
Okay.
Just answer the question, Norm, for God's sake. You said you don't want to evade the truth. Should Hamas stay in power or not? Answer the question.
Piers, either you're going to moderate the program or there's honestly no point in continuing.
I do think it's I have to say, I do think it's a very simple question. And it goes right to the heart.
No, it's not.
It goes right to the heart of Israel's argument about why they are continuing to execute the war.
Piers, how about letting me decide whether it's a simple question? How about letting me decide?
Well, either Hamas stays in power or it doesn't it?
Okay.
I don't think you have to be a professor to answer the question.
Piers, there's a difference between whether or not Hamas stays in power and whether Hamas should be in power. So let me get into the stays in power is a military question. Should be in power, well, let's look at it. I say if Hamas, which is responsible for the killings of 36 children on October 7th, should not stay in power, then you must certainly agree, Piers, and I'm going to kindly ask you to please answer me. You must surely agree then that Israel, which has killed now approximately 12,000 children and is plausibly accused of having killed them in the course of a genocide. Now, I'm going to ask you, Piers, to please
What is your source for 12,000 children? What's the source? What is your source, please?
Okay.
What's your source?
Well, it's the Palestinian Health Authority run by Hamas. We know that.
Run by Hamas. Wait. No,
Rabbi Shmuley, you don't interrupt. This is actually an important question and an important moment in the debate. Continue, Norm Finkelstein.
So I have to ask you, Piers, if you believe that Hamas should not stay in power because it killed 36 children on October 7th, then you must surely agree several times, 1,000 times more emphatically that the Israeli government should not be in power because it killed 12,000 children, not as collateral damage, but plausibly, according to 15 of the 17 judges on the highest judicial body in the world. Okay, you said
that point. Okay, here's my answer.
Here's my answer to you.
Here's my answer.
And a genocide.
Here's my answer. You haven't so far answered my question. If you do, I will give you an emphatic answer to yours. So let me just ask again, should Hamas stay in power?
My answer is, if we apply one standard...
that's not an answer.
Across the board...
No, that's not an answer.
If we apply one standard across the board, I am perfectly happy to say Hamas should be removed from power if you agree that several thousand times
you've made that point.
More
Here's my answer.
emphatically, the Israeli government should be removed from power.
I think there are two completely separate questions, and I would answer it like this.
No, they're not.
Well, I'm going to explain to you. I'm going to explain why I believe they are. Because,
I will listen.
Because Israel's response was a response to an appalling terror attack. I believed after October the 7th, Hamas rescinded any right to continue having any power over Gaza and should be removed. The only debate would then be how would that best be done? And I have serious question marks about Israel's response. In response to whether the current... Hang on. Let me finish my sentence, please. And in response to your question, Norman Finkelstein, about Israel's government, no, I do not believe they should continue, actually. I think this government has lost the faith of its people. I think Netanyahu in particular has lost all confidence and popularity with the Israeli people, who blame him for what happened on October the 7th. And so, no, I don't think they should stay in power. Actually, I think both countries should have new leadership and new governments. That's my answer. But again, I'll just come back to you.
Norm is saying,
but hang on. I don't equivocate either with the other. You can divorce the two questions. You can say, after October the 7th, should Hamas stay in power? Yes or no? And then you can have a question mark about whether this current Israel government should stay in power because of the way they responded. They're two different questions. But you, Norman Finkelstein, so far... Well, hang on. Wait a second, Rabbi Shmuley. I just want to get one answer out of Norman Finkelstein as to whether you will answer my question about whether Hamas should stay in power.
Piers, if you use a single standard across the board, then I accept your conclusion. So long as you're being morally as well as legally consistent, I have personally no problem with that conclusion. However, I would want to say, Piers, and I'm trying to be honest, but also intellectually consistent in this matter. You said that Hamas disqualified itself from leadership because of the atrocity that was committed, or atrocities that were committed October 7th.
Yes.
Now, if you agree with the head of the National Security Council of Israel at the time in 2004, that Hamas is a huge concentration camp. I'm quoting him now.
Gaza, you mean?
Would you also agree that October 7th was a reaction to confining 1 million children in a concentration camp?
Okay, Piers, he's not answering your question. He never will. But Piers, I have to be fair.
All right, let me bring in Rabbi Shmuley, because you've been waiting.
Okay.
Yeah, this is really frustrating, because it seems like the I mean, again, you can Monday night quarterback like Norm's phrasing, but like his point seems perfectly clear to me. That says, look, should Hamas stay in power? Well, what does that mean? Does that mean that like I like Hamas? That like if I could like wave a magical wand, Hamas would still be in power?
Would I vote for them?
Right. Would I vote for them if I had a vote somehow in an election about whether exactly, right? So one way to interpret it is like, do I, root for Hamas being in power, which is the sense in which Piers seems to be willing to say that the Israeli government should be removed from power. He's like, I would like root for them no longer being in power. But then the other question is, do I think that removing Hamas from power is worth continuing all of the bloodshed going on in Gaza, even if you're going to say, oh, we're going to do it in a nicer form or whatever? It's like, do I think that means that like I would be against a permanent ceasefire because like this is something that the war should continue until they're removed from power? It's the equivalent of if you asked somebody in 2003 and did it in that same yes or no only right way. It's like, hey, do you think Saddam Hussein should be in power? It's like, well, I mean, I don't like Saddam Hussein. I as a murderous dictator, but like, I don't. If what you're really asking me is, do I support the United States invading Iraq? Then no.
Right. Yeah, like, I don't think George W. Bush should be hanged necessarily.
The
way Saddam Hussein was. But like, that's the very point. Is like, here is one of the points where I'm like mainly frustrated with Piers instead of Shmuley, because he's creating this false equivalency between saying that you don't think that the Israeli government or much of the Israeli government or whatever he says should be in power, and that you don't think Hamas should be in power. Like, we all know, or at least a lot of us know that like what that means in the case of Hamas is destroying Gaza in the hopes that you'll also eliminate, presumably in the hope you'll also eliminate all of these Hamas fighters, which, by the way, they're not doing a crackerjack job at so far.
No,
like,
not even by their own numbers.
And they're claiming like we don't know where they are. So we're just gonna bomb the shit out of the whole place. Like that's their
if you even if you believe the Israelis own completely made up numbers, then they're still doing a horrible job of it, right? Because like if you look at the number of you know, people who've died versus how many Hamas fighters they themselves claim, right? You know,
about the fact that they don't know where they are, and that is like their really shitty, flimsy pretext for like bombing the whole population.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, yeah, the way I would have answered this question is if you mean, you know, if I were somehow Hamas agreed to hold an election tomorrow and I were given a vote in that election, would I vote to install Hamas back in power? No, I would not. I would vote against them.
I would have answered it like, do you think the Israeli government should be militarily removed?
Well, that's the thing, right? It's like, yes, I believe that, right? Like if I were somehow given a vote in some sort of hypothetical Gaza election for some reason, right? Yes, Hamas would not have my vote. They would, you know, like no matter how many spam texts they got saying Hamas is counting on my vote, right? You know, I wouldn't vote for Hamas. But like, if you say, do I support continuing the war until Hamas is out of power? Then fuck no. And similarly, right? Do I think, you know, like if you have, and presumably what I mean by that is what you Piers mean when you say, oh, both countries should have new governments. It's like, yeah, but how? Right? Like this is like the saying like, oh, both places should have new governments. Like, okay. But in one case, what you mean is that you hope they'll lose in an election. And in the other, what you're saying is that you're okay with continuing, even if for the sake of argument, you don't believe the, you know, South African genocide case, which I do, right? But like, even if for the sake of argument, you didn't believe the South African genocide case, at the very least, continuing an immensely bloody war, you know, until that happens, right? That's like killing tons of civilians, etc. Then it's like, no, I don't, right? Like, and that should be a very simple, you know, that should be a very simple point to understand. And yeah, I think Norm's in the chat said very, very, no, it was El Hovis, the Finkelstein's making a very Chomsky style argument. Piers is not getting it. That's exactly right. Like his, you know, this is that is exactly the kind of argument he's making. It's like
it doesn't even occur to him that he would never, like, it would never occur to him to apply this standard to Israel. You know?
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's like what Norm is trying to do is Norm is begging him to apply consistent standards. And all Piers is getting out of that is he's trying to change the subject. It's like, no, he's trying to decide what principle we're going to use to decide this, right? And that principle, whatever it is, let's apply it in the same way in both cases, right? And this is also, by the way, this is like the least important criticism of what Piers is doing here. This is really petty, but I can't not, like, he doesn't know what equivocating means. Like, and this is actually not the first time I noticed this today. I saw somebody on Twitter doing the same thing. Equivocating doesn't mean you're drawing an analogy between two things that like somebody doesn't like, right? Yeah. Like that's equivocating is when you're being slippery about language. So like you're using the same word to mean two different things. That's equivocating, right? Yeah. Like this has just saying that somebody made an analogy you don't like. It's not fucking that's not equivocating. And like, if you don't think the analogy is reasonable, what you should do is spell out why not. And like the only time that Piers came even close to saying what was wrong with the analogy in his mind, it was when he said the thing about how Israel's response was a response. And then it seems like So like essentially it seemed like he didn't quite spell this out, but it seemed like what Piers was insinuating was, well, it's not the same thing. We shouldn't evaluate it by the same standards because like Hamas started it, right? And Israel's responding. And then it seems like Piers's point is totally right there. Sorry, Norm's point in response is totally right. It's like, well, hold on. Why not say that Hamas was responding to what the head of the Israeli National Security, former head of the Israeli National Security Council, called turning Gaza into a giant concentration camp, or in fact, look, it's easy to look up what Hamas itself has said about the reasons why they launched the October 7th attack, right? This isn't a matter of like, this is the kind of shit that used to bother the hell out of me in the immediate post 9/11 period, when the only thing that you were allowed to say was like a reason why Al-Qaeda attacked us is that they hate us for our freedom, right? It's like, there's this, I don't know if you remember, there's like a wonderful David Cross bit on one of his stand-up albums where he's like, oh, they hate us for our freedom. Really? Because I thought that they hated us for our relationship to the Saudi royal family and their support for Israel. And, the reason I thought that that's why bin Laden did the attack is that he said so, right? And I'm not doing it justice, right? But it's like, it's the same thing. It's like, you don't have to think that justifies 9/11 or October 7th, right? Moral justification is a different question. But if you're just saying like, what's the sequence of cause and effects?
Right. And honestly, there were people in the mid to late 90s, Chomsky is obviously a good example, but even people like Benjamin Barber wrote presciently about how global economic and military imperialism of the West was on a collision course with global jihad, and that was likely to be some event like this in the coming years. Maybe not anybody imagined that it would be that magnitude, but
this is the kind of point that I was used to like. It's like just like the ability to disentangle causation from justification and just say this is, if you want to know why Al-Qaeda did something or why Hamas did something, hey, here's a good test. Check what they said, right? This is I'm not saying so you're saying they wouldn't lie or whatever. It's like, okay, but it's like pretty good evidence about what the intention is, right? That this is the sort of point that, Glenn Greenwald always used to make. I remember in the Obama era, I'd always read him in Salon. And he'd always, he was always fighting with these liberal journalists, who'd be like, oh, essentially they hate us for our freedom. And he'd be like, look, every time there's ever one of these trials where somebody who, thought that they were going to blow up a truck in Times Square or something, but was actually every single person they were in contact with for the last 2 years was an FBI agent, and they're brought to trial. Every single time they always say the same thing, right? They don't say, I did this because there was something in the hadiths about, killing infidels, right? They don't say, oh, I did this because the freedom, bothers me so much, right? They say I did this because the United States is murdering all these people in drone strikes.
Even in 2006, I believe it was Donald Rumsfeld had the Department of Defense issue a report sort of on this question throughout the Middle East of why people on the ground there feel the way they do about us. And in that report done under the Bush administration, people on the ground who did that report were the people we interviewed were they actually don't hate us. It was almost identical to what you're saying. They specified, they said they don't hate us for our freedoms or something, but because they're strangling us economically and they're strangling our economies and they're imposing militarily.
So it's if you just saying oh, the difference is that Israel was responding to stuff. It's what? In Hamas's own statement about this, they said, one of the things they said is that one of the reasons is that it was a response to these massive settler pogroms on the West Bank that had, like earlier in the year, like before October 7th, that was like the worst year on record for that. And, there was an area that's like something like 10% of the West Bank that, almost all the Palestinians have been driven out of, right? Like they said that's what they were responding to.
Yeah.
And so it's like, look, in both cases, you can be cynical about that and say they have other reasons, but it's like, Jesus, you can't say that about the like most far-right government in Israel's history doing all this in response to October 7th, that they have their own reasons for doing it.
Yeah. Also, one thing I just didn't want to miss is like Shmuley talking about how the definition of genocide. So he talks about the definition of genocide and then argues that in order to argue that Israel's committing a genocide under the definition of the word, Norm needs to make the case that Israel is slaughtering the Palestinians because they're Palestinians, and Arabs and Muslims adds those two as well, or else slaughtering a people, or else like basically the slaughtering of a people can't technically be genocide. And then he also says that no Israeli Arabs have risen up to stop this genocide. I
mean, so that part's crazy because it's like you're saying, I mean, first, like if rise up, you mean like militarily, then sure, but like, I mean, up until the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, there was like almost no military uprising by Jews against the Holocaust, right? Like that doesn't, never mind. Right. By like, by, people in like who weren't immediately facing that themselves just on behalf of it. Right. But like also, so it's like, that's, I mean, like, yeah, you might as well say, I mean, like if that's your standard, then it's like, Jesus, I mean, the vast majority of the atrocities that go on anywhere in the world, right? People haven't actually engaged in like a military uprising to stop them, right? Like, but then the other thing is, actually, I mean, I don't have the numbers off, handy off to like on my fingertips, but like, I know I've seen polling data on this, and it's like, yeah, I mean, the Israeli Arab public is on, as you would expect, a completely different page than the Israeli Jewish public on Gaza, right? It's not like, oh, they're all Israelis, so they all support it. It's like they have a Israeli Arab opinion is massively opposed to what's happening in Gaza, as you would expect, right? I mean, you're talking about, people's, second cousins and stuff in some cases, right? This is, so, and also, the way he's bringing up the Israeli Arabs is, in this case, I guess he's not adding his own super insane Shmuley twist. He's just like parroting the standard talking point. But it's like, oh, there are Israeli Arabs in the Knesset, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, yeah, okay. But 2 points about that. One, the fact that in many ways Israeli Arabs have equal rights is completely irrelevant to the question of whether like the rights that Arabs in the West Bank and Gaza are denied, right? Whether that constitutes apartheid or et cetera, right? And that's just a separate question, right? Like, I mean, if you say, this is, oh, it's not apartheid because, the Arabs over here are given the rights that are denied to the Arabs over here. It's like, but come on, man. This is like, there were different racial gradations and statuses in South Africa too, right? Like this is, and yeah, I mean, I think the point that Chomsky always makes about this is exactly correct. Is like, yeah, if the, yes, the discrimination against Israeli Arabs is real and bad, but is not nearly as bad as what Black people went through in apartheid South Africa. The status of Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza is actually much worse than the status of Black people in apartheid South Africa, right? Like the severity of the oppression is actually much worse. So that's one point. The other is like, come on. Like, yes, if you're grading on a curve for like what it's like to be an Israeli Arab who is a citizen of Israel and has all these legal rights versus what it's like to be a Palestinian in the West Bank, never mind Gaza, which is just a completely different order of magnitude, then it's like, yeah, sure. Obviously, it's a, million times better, right, to be an Israeli Arab, no doubt about that. But if you're comparing it to, if you're grading it on a curve of like, say, the status of racial minorities in the United States, right, then it's like, yeah, it's way worse.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Like way worse. I mean, this is the, that you can't, just for example, that, Israeli, Israeli Arabs who marry, Palestinians from the West Bank, aren't legally allowed to live together as a married couple in Israel, allegedly for security reasons. I don't know if anybody believes that. That's the official justification, but it's like, pretty clearly for demographic reasons. That you have that people who, that like Arab families who fled from, Israel proper, during the Nakba, like aren't allowed to come home, that you have that there's like something called the nation state law that officially decrees Israel to be the nation state of the Jewish people, which is like, yeah, imagine that there was a law passed saying that the United States was officially like a nation state of American white people. The fact that, even the most liberal Zionist parties tend to shy away from having, from accepting the support of Arab parties in order to like cobble together a majority coalition in the Knesset, because they think that'll deprive them of legitimacy, that, just et cetera, right? It's like, yes, obviously better to be an Israeli Arab than to be a Palestinian in the West Bank or Gaza. But also there is a degree of discrimination and openly second-class status there that's way worse than like racism in the United States or et cetera. And it's like, it's just really, it's really gross and disingenuous. And like, obviously Shmuley doesn't give a shit about these people. He's just using them as like a rhetorical prop because it's convenient to him.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Patiently.
Okay.
More patient than you normally do. So
every time, there's one main reason I wanted to do this debate, and Piers, thank you for having me. I'll tell you what it is. There were 6 million Jews who were turned into ash and lampshades and shot, and they're in, graves. They have no voice. Their only tomb is our memory. Norman Finkelstein is a Holocaust denier. He has said that David Irving, the number one Holocaust denier on earth, who Britain despises to their credit, lost huge against Deborah Lipstadt. He said he's a great historian. Every time he calls Gaza a concentration camp, as if there's gas chambers there, as if there's SS Einsatzgruppen going around shooting Palestinians, he denies he is a Holocaust denier. Now, why does this matter? Because why won't Norman Finkelstein answer your simple question about whether Hamas should stay in power? And don't tell me this is ad hominem. In 2016, he gave an interview where he said that he essentially makes his income through giving speeches. He said that he gave 40 slips to his accountant for speeches against Israel.
That doesn't mean he doesn't mean what he says.
No, wait 1 second. Hold on.
It doesn't mean he doesn't mean what he says.
No, 1 second. Hold on. If he attacks Hamas, he said that his speeches went from 40 to only 4. He'll be down to 0. Now, here's the point. You're right. It doesn't mean that. But when you pressed him in your first debate, you did so admirably, Piers. Shani Luke's parents stayed at my house for the past 10 days. She was the woman who, within an hour or two of the attack, the German-Israeli woman, was put dead, shot in the head, stripped naked. I maintain that she was the most desecrated woman in world history in terms of how many people saw her naked body. As that was happening, Norman Finkelstein wrote, "It warms every fiber of my soul about these scenes in Gaza. And glory, glory, hallelujah." Now, to your credit, you pressed him on this in the first interview. And you know what he said? He said, "I had no idea. I only thought 50 Jews had died. I didn't know 1,200. So 2 questions. Number 1, Norman Finkelstein, how many Jews need to die before you are no longer celebrating their death and saying, glory, hallelujah. Is it 51? Is it 500? You know, one black man was murdered in Minnesota. His name was George Floyd, and tens of millions of people marched against his murder. God bless them. But for you, it would have had, we need 49 other dead black men before they start marching. Number one. Number two, what you're confessing, Norm, is that you are a joke of a historian, because your defense to Piers Morgan was, I didn't know. I have 3 people who do my Twitter. I gave it to them. By the way, I'd love to know even one name of those 3. I dare you to mention their names, because I'd like to question them, because I believe you're fabricating that as well. I think you wrote this yourself. You did not give it to 3 people who work for you on Twitter. But here's my question. You claim to be a serious historian. What kind of serious historian, before they even know the facts, says, I love seeing dead Jews? You admit you knew nothing. You say that you had no knowledge, and you were saying, glory, hallelujah, may more Jewish women be shot in the vagina and have their breasts cut off. Now, later when Piers Morgan said to you, hey, Norm, at least take it off. At least delete it. You now admit 1,200 died. And you know what you said? It's part of the historical record. So you are a fraudulent historian by your own admission. You said this fraud that you are thrilled that Jews were shot in the vagina, women were gang raped, is part of history, but it's a false history. So to be fair, Piers, when you tell me ad hominem, come on, the man either has credibility or he has no credibility.
Okay.
He has no tenure. Yeah. Okay.
Let me give the final word to Norman Finkelstein.
The issue before us is Gaza. It's not me. Now, there is a temptation, obviously, on my part to defend my professional honor and my personal honor, but I am going to forego that. I'm going to withstand that temptation and end on the note that this conversation began and was supposed to continue. And so I would say that if you are indicting me, then you are also indicting the sanity of the 15 judges on the International Court of Justice, including, quite surprising to me, including the American judge. Now, if you examine the proceedings closely, which I did, each judge had the option of including in their decision what's called a declaration. And the German judge did exercise that option and wrote a 5-page declaration in which he distanced himself from certain of the findings. However, it was very noticeable that Israel's main ally in the world, the judge from that country, the American judge, did not issue a declaration, which is to say, she went along with the conclusion without qualification that Israel is plausibly committing genocide. Now, I would want to end on the note, as you know, Piers, genocide is the crime of crimes under international law. To be plausibly guilty of the crime of genocide, it's a very, very high standard, a very high standard. And it seems to me, require a very high degree of dementia to deny that crimes of on a vast scale are occurring in Gaza.
Okay.
Thank you.
We're going to leave it there.
That is a blood libel. That is a blood libel. It's a lie. The ICJ never said that. That is pure blood libel. Norm, you may as well say that we Jews mix blood into of Christian children into our matzahs, poison the wells of Europe. You are guilty of a blood libel. The ICJ never said that. They ruled in Israel's favor. You, sir, are a liar, and you are guilty of a libel against your own people and against your own parents. Your parents were not haters. They were victims. They did not hate Germans. The Germans hated them and tried to murder them.
Rabbi Shmuley,
you owe your parents' memory and apology.
We're going to leave it there. Norman Finkelstein, Rabbi Shmuley, thank you both very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Piers.
Good Lord.
Yeah, that one's pretty rough, dude.
The way he had that last little chunk of Shmuley doing 5 minutes of personal slander, like that had absolutely nothing to do with Gaza, but just like making the most ugly allegations he possibly could about Norm as a person. Norm just being like, you know what? There are more important things to talk about here than what's true about me. I'm just going, like, you just accused the child of Holocaust survivors of being a Holocaust denier. And he's not even taking the bait. He's like, you know what? The thing that matters most here is Gaza. I'm going to spend my time on that, not debating what's true about Norm Finkelstein. After, by the way, like, so he does, Shmuley does like 5 minutes of personal libel. That's, I guess libel's written, personal slander, right? That's the, against Norm. Piers says, okay, Norm, you can have the last word. Norm, honestly, displaying a lot of poise and dignity, says, no, I'm not going to like engage with that. Like, what matters here is Gaza. I'm going to spend my last word on Gaza. And then Shmuley just does 2 minutes of sputtering about how Norm is an anti-Semite who's doing blood libel. And Piers just lets him.
Yeah, pretty bad. I mean, yeah, he, like you said, you alluded to how he opens with Norm being a Holocaust denier. So now Norm is like an anti-Semitic, German-hating Holocaust denier. So that's where we're at now at this point in the debate. That's how many like different accusations have piled up. They just make they're completely incoherent. And yeah, I mean, the thing that stands out, there's a lot in there to unpack, but the thing that stands out the most to me was he says, how many Jews need to die before you're no longer celebrating their deaths? Which, like, again, like, I feel like the hypocrisy is just brazen because, like, a lot more Palestinians have died and he still won't call it a genocide or stop cheering it on, even. Like, at least Piers, like, he won't call it a genocide, but he's not, like, saying it's a good thing, you know?
Yeah. No, and it's like also out of the, like the October 7th civilian death toll, again, I believe right now, current estimate is about 695 people. It's really hard to say about Gaza, but like the overall death toll is what, something like 35,000. And
Higher, I think.
yeah, okay. So I think that was the last number I heard, but I could definitely believe it was out of date. Certainly in the tens of thousands. I mean, it's been in the tens of thousands for months, right?
Yeah.
They and like I've seen people say, oh, it's that like the thing that's like really obscene that I'll see people do is they'll say, okay, well, we'll use like the number of women and children as like an approximate proxy for the number of civilians. So you're assuming that like more or less every single adult male who's killed in Gaza is a Hamas fighter, even though the usual estimates for the total number of Hamas fighters in Gaza is like 30,000 and out of 2.3 million people. And we know that this is so indiscriminate that, at least 85% of the population has been displaced from their homes. I suspect it's actually a lot higher than that at this point, because that's given how, given the overall pace of the war over the last 5 months, that number, I keep quoting there as like a kind of an old number at that point. This point, I suspect it might be getting a lot harder to, collate data on this, but collect data on this rather. But they have but like, it's so indiscriminate that like at least 85% of people have been displaced from their homes. And you're going to tell me that like almost all of the adult males who've been killed were Hamas fighters. Like, come on,
Yeah.
basically, if you're an actual Hamas fighter who died, that's like a rounding error
Yeah.
in what's happening right now.
Yeah. Also, just on the Holocaust denier claim too, like, just because it is like a big lot, like I could imagine like somebody seeing this show for the first time, never heard of Finkelstein.
Yeah.
Like, this is the first thing they hear about him, some guy calling him a Holocaust denier. Like, I do feel like it's important for people who don't know, like, not only is he a child of Holocaust survivors, but his parents had no family left by the end. Like, they were alone in the world because their entire family was exterminated in the Holocaust. And not only that, but like Finkelstein has written and spoken on the Holocaust quite a bit. And I understand that like some of his statements about that are controversial. Like, they hurt people's feelings sometimes. But like his numbers about like what happened in the Holocaust are in line with everyone else's. He has said that the greatest historian on the Holocaust is Raoul Hilberg, who, like, regardless of whatever he said about David Irving, like, is, that's who he thinks is whose scholarship is the preeminent leading scholarship on the topic. And nobody can accuse that person of being a Holocaust denier. Like, it's just like,
no, it's
shameless claim.
It's beyond nuts, like, to call him a Holocaust denier. I mean, he wrote a book called The Holocaust Industry, and his whole point was objecting to the misuse of the memory of the Holocaust, because the whole point is that the whole point doesn't make sense if you don't assume that this is a very real and very, that this is like sacrosanct and shouldn't be used in this way.
Exactly.
It's like, and the way, I mean, again, like, if you're like sputtering about the blood libel at the end of it, like, it's, I think on some level you've got to know that didn't go well for you.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I think this guy has like more confidence than anything, like more confidence than knowledge.
Well, that much for sure. Yes.
Yeah.
He has vastly more confidence than knowledge. Like, I mean, I literally don't think he knows what the ICJ ruling was. Like, I think he saw people say that they didn't grant the request for order an immediate ceasefire, and that's like all he got out of it.
Yeah, right? Like I said, I think he just looked at a headline real quick and literally misread it.
Yeah, no, it's exactly what you said earlier about like when you glance at emails and you like realize late, like the next day, it's like, oh shit, that like said the opposite of what I thought it did.
Yeah. Now my response makes no sense. Yeah,
exactly. Good God.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess my only, my only other thought about this is just like, I like the fact that this is the caliber of person who's like out there taking this position right now, right? Yeah. That like, I don't want them to have, I don't know. It's the, somebody, like, you kind of think about like Israelis who, were like featured in, like Western media at one time,
or Martin Rayveld or Benny Morris or something.
Yeah. Like it's not, it's like, no. This is who I want representing this position. This guy who's like, I mean, I guess he spent too long. Like this guy who's like dressed like a member of the Gemstone family, and he's just like yelling and sputtering and like accusing a child of Holocaust survivors of being a Holocaust denier, saying something that anybody who bothers to do a 10-second Google search will immediately realize is false about the ICJ ruling, saying you might as well, assert the blood libel. Like, yeah, this is the PR that I absolutely want Zionism to have right now. And so, Rabbi Shmuley, God bless you. Keep doing this.
Yeah, we should send him around the country. We should be wearing him on our fucking.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, totally.
Oh,
Totally, man. Wow.
All
That
right.
was great.
This is well. I hope you do the Substack write up because I think it would be great to see all of this in one kind of centralized place, right?
I'm sure we get something at least. Yeah.
Yeah.
I might text you, get some advice. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Anyway, hope you do that. Anybody who wants to read Matthew's Substack, there is a link in the description down below the screen where you're watching us right now. So everybody should check this out. Could be back on Monday. I think I could say this. Last I heard, she was checking her schedule to make sure that she can do it. But I think on Monday, I'm actually going to be debating Brianna Wu about some of this stuff. So that's coming up on the show on Monday, assuming that there isn't a last minute scheduling snafu again. So there's no last, I shouldn't say that again, we talked about doing it before, but there was never an actual, scheduling thing. So in any case, that's coming up on Monday. And we will be back then. I'm sure Matthew will be back soon. Meanwhile, read his Substack. God, I don't get the impression that he's a drinker, but I really hope Norm had something to take the edge off after he was done with that. But
yeah. 2 slices of pepperoni pizza a month.
Well, I hope that this was one of the nights that he allows himself one of the slices of pepperoni pizza, because God damn it, he deserved it after that. So we're gonna leave it there for tonight. Left is best.
All right.